Okay, so I am sharing the screen, and finally we are going to talk about contemporary development economics. And the first thing we will go with that, what is the difference between economic growth and economic development, then what is the income approach to development. Okay, there are certain approaches for economic development, and what is the income approach, how can we say that a country is underdeveloped or developing, or it is being developed, what are the criterias by which we can just say that a country is developing or developed or underdeveloped. So there are some approach. One of the approach is income approach. One of the approach is capability approach. Then we will distinguish between income approach and capability approach. And finally, after that, AMRA Human Development Index, we will go for Human Development Index and the construction of HDI. And not only that, what I told in the class, that whenever we are constructing HDI or any kind of thing, we will just have some numerical example for you HDI construction, and we will get after this class we will just work with an Excel file, and in that particular Excel file we can go with some that how can we construct HDI or anything. Okay, now the thing is that what was the difference between economic development and economic growth. We already have studied in our 5th semester UG days that there is a distinction between economic growth and economic development. But in the early days, in 1990s or 1980s, or I shall go beyond that, 1950s or previously to that, there was basically no distinction between economic growth and economic development. What basically people think that what is growth? Growth is something like a increase in the country's GDP, a increase in the country's national income, a increase in the country's export, a increase in the country's per capita income. So whenever there is an increase in the economic, whenever there is a boost in the economic growth, people used to think that this is basically nothing, this is also economic development. But with the time, whenever time goes up, we all saw that with the time what happened basically when we have economic growth, but there are certain criterias like our health sector, like our educational sector, like some social sectors which are not growing with the economic growth. Means that if we say that a country with a very high GDP, so a country which is having a very high GDP, does that mean that the country is having all the social sector all the social sector of the country is also developed? No, it may happen that the country is suffering from poverty problems, it may happen that the country is suffering from unemployment problems, it may happen that the country may be suffering from some health problems or any kind of thing. So economic growth and economic development is totally a different thing. And after that, when there was economic growth, people used to think that if a country is having economic growth, that it increase in GDP, increase in GNP, increase in national income, increase in per capita income, anything, the country is having some economic development. But with the time, as time emerges, we can consider that there is a distinction, a clear distinction between economic growth and economic development. Because economic development means not only a increase in the economic growth, economic development is basically some changes with the economic growth. Some changes in the sense a reduction in the unemployment, a reduction in the inequality, a reduction in the poverty of the country, a boost in the educational sector of the country, a boost in the medical science or health sector of the country, that actually considers as economic growth. Economic development. So economic development is basically, if we write down the formula, economic development is basically something like economic growth plus some changes. What are the changes? I told that some changes in the social sector, okay, some boost in the social sector or some changes in the social sector. Now if we consider that, if we just distinguish in some senses, that first we can consider about improvement in health, nutrition and life expectancy. Previously, if we see that, if we go to the past of our country, and in the past time of our country, we can see that there was a very low life expectancy at birth of a pupil, because most of the people, you have gone for the demographic transition theory. The demographic transition theory suggests us that there are basically three stages of a country: first stage, second stage and third stage. In the first stage there is a high death rate, high birth rate. In the second stage the country is developing in some sense, so there is a high birth rate but low death rate. and in the third stage, low birth rate, low death rate. So first thing is that a country's improvement in health, nutrition and life expectancy. Sometimes a country's expansion in educational factors or literacy, a reduction in the poverty and inequality, and you can also see in unemployment, and some structural transformation of the economy. This is very important, from agricultural to industry and service. If you look upon the India's contribution, the contribution of the different sectors in India's economy, whenever we are, if we go to the if we go to the times like 1947 or 1950 or 1980, you can see agriculture was the backbone of India. Nowadays also agriculture is the backbone of India, but there are basically three sectors: primary sector or agricultural sector, secondary sector or manufacturing sector, and finally the service sector or the tertiary sector. But whenever a country is moving from agricultural sector to industry or service sector, the country is expanding in the country is expanding in employment sense, the country will expand in some educational, some technologies, etc., etc., will grow in the country. So whenever there is a structural transformation of the economy, we can say that we are going through a developing sense and the country is developing day by day. And finally, the strengthening of institutions, governance and civil liberties. Here institution doesn't mean some institution like a center or anything. Here institution basically tells us about the government bodies which government controls. All the government offices, all the social offices which we have in our country, those are nothing but those are the institutions. And what is governance? Governance is basically nothing but the total law and order and each and everything that is controlled by a country, and that is controlled by some institutions, some governmental bodies. And finally, the greater freedom, security or dignity and self-esteem for the individuals. Okay, so whenever we talk about economic growth, it is basically something, a narrow concept, or I should say a quantitative concept. Quantitative means we can measure economic growth via many things like GDP, GNP, national income, employment, inequality, poverty. We can measure economic growth in many sense, but whenever we are talking about economic development, it is not only quantitative in nature, that we cannot measure it only with figures, that this is the GDP of our country in the last 5 years and the GDP continuously grows with a 5% or 10% rate, so we can say our country is growing. No, not only we can measure economic development with figures, that 2 trillion is our is India's GDP, 5 trillion is India's GDP. No, we have to measure in qualitative as well as quantitative sense. Quantitative and qualitative basically means those we can measure with figures, that is GDP, GNP or any other factors which we can measure with the figures, that is basically quantitative. And qualitative basically means the total concept of educational sector, health sector, poverty, inequality, unemployment, each and everything which we consider for a country to grow. And we can measure basically our economic growth through GDP, one of the GNP, per capita income. And then finally, what we go for economic development, we can measure with human development index. PQLI means physical quality of life index, or MPI, or some types of dashboard of indicators. Nowadays we can measure a country's happiness index, we can measure, there are many types of index by which we can measure a country's economic development. Okay, now basically the whenever we are the most, I already told you that in 1960s and 1970s development was basically understood entirely in terms of economic growth. There was no other term like economic growth or economic development. But finally, when the time emerges with the models of Harrod Domar, you have learnt about Harrod Domar model or Rostow's stages of growth model. These types of model came into the action, and when these types of model came into action, we already saw that there is a certain difference in economic growth and economic development. Okay, and basically the most important thing is that whenever there are some structural dimensions, some institutional dimensions and human dimensions. Structural dimensions basically means what I told you, that if you just go to Google and search what is the total composition of primary sector or the agricultural sector in our national income, what is the total what is the contribution of primary sector or agricultural sector in our national income, you can merely see that it is, I think it is nearly about 17 to 20%. Okay, nowadays 17 to 20%. But what in, if you see, if you look at the data at our past in 1980s or 1960s, we can see the most of the contribution in national income was given by the agricultural sector. but in nowadays the country is transforming because there is a structural transformation in the country, and the country is moving from agricultural sector to some service sector or some manufacturing sector. Okay, and there are some things like institutional dimensions. Institutional dimensions basically means there are some property rights, there are some financial systems, there are some regulatory bodies, what we call as the governmental bodies. Whichever governmental bodies we have, we basically have some institutional dimensions. And there are also some human dimensions. Human dimensions basically means human capital. Human capital is a very important thing in this sense. Human capital means that is what is the, how, in which sense we are using technology, in which sense we are upgrading ourselves with time, with technology and each and everything. Okay, so whenever there is a direct enhancement in the pupils health, or if you say about literacy or education skills, freedoms, each and everything, human dimensions are also basically changing with the development. So now one of the most important thing is that whenever we talk about economic growth, rather than talking about economic growth, because suppose a country may have a GDP of rupees 100. If we take two countries, and one country is having a GDP of rupees 50. Okay, now if I tell you that in this particular, this is country A, this is country B, and this is the GDP. Now if in country A there are only 25 persons living in that country, 25%. So whenever there are 25% living in that country, if I want to get the per capita income or the per capita GDP, what should I do? I just basically divide 50 with 25 and I get the per capita income is 2 rupees in that particular country. But suppose in country B, there are 150 persons living in that country. So what is the per capita income? 100 divided by 150. 100 divided by 150, and it basically becomes 1.5. Okay, sorry, it basically becomes 100 divided by 150. So it basically becomes something like, if we divide it, I will get something less than 1. I will get something less than 1. So whenever you are just dividing the country's total GDP with the total number of person or the population in the country, you can just get that what is the per capita income. Now we can consider per capita income as an indicator for economic development, because suppose a country with a very huge GDP, but its population is so large that if we divide the total GDP with the population, the per capita income is very low. What do you mean by per capita income? Suppose we 3 or 4 are sitting in this class, and if we are 4 are sitting in this class, if we divide the total GDP, suppose we live in a particular country and the GDP is rupees 100, and if we divide rupees 100, that is by the 4, then we can say that each of us is earning rupees 25. But whenever we are earning rupees 25, we can say that the country's per capita income is 25. So we can measure that yes, a country is having a very large GDP, but whenever we are dividing it with the population, we are getting a low per capita income. So we can consider per capita income as a part of development until and unless these points basically stands for. Okay, so we can consider, but there are certain problems for which we cannot use per capita income as a measure of economic development. First, the most important thing is that it basically gives us the average. It basically gives us the average. Suppose there are 4 persons in the country, and all the 4 persons, person 1 gets a income of rupees 50, person 2 gets a income of rupees 20, and person 3 is getting a income of rupees 10, and finally the person 4 is getting an income of rupees 20. So whenever this is the distribution, we can see there is a huge gap between 50 and 10. So there is a huge inequality, and if we just get the total 50 plus 20 70 plus 10 80 plus 20 100 divided by 4, if we say that the per capita income of that country is rupees 25, we cannot say that the country is having a per capita income of rupees 25, because there are certain distinctions. Not each of the persons is getting rupees 25. All the persons are getting something different. There is an inequality concept in here. So whenever we just get the data and just add them up to get the GDP, after getting the GDP, whenever we are just dividing it with the population, we get something like the GDP per capita. But GDP per capita is the average, it is not the exact income of the pupil. It doesn't shows us the exact income of the people. So what happens? So there is a difference in the GDP per capita, because there is the GDP per capita shows that there is only one figure, but there is a huge inequality between person 1 and person 3, because person 1 is having an income 50 where person 3 is getting only rupees 10. So there is a inequality of 40 rupees. So we cannot consider GDP per capita as a measure of economic development. The first point is that it only gives us the average, it doesn't give us the exact income of a particular person. Secondly, it basically excludes some of the non-marketing activities. Non-marketing activities like, suppose, subsistence farming. This is one of the most important farming that is all over, that is practiced in all over the India, in all the parts of the rural India. Okay, subsistence farming. Subsistence farming basically means, suppose you are living in rural India and you are having a plot of land where you can just grow some paddy, you can just grow some wheat, or you can just grow some any other crops. And after growing paddy or wheat or any other crops, you are going to your plot of land and getting them. After farming them, you are just consuming by yourself and by your family. It is being consumed by you and your family. So what is the money? Because this is a non-marketing activity. Where is the money? There is no money basically. When I am not getting any type of money, because I am not selling them into the market. What I am doing? I am just going to the plot of land. I am just farming them, and after farming them, it is being consumed by me and my family. So whenever this happens, these are basically subsistence farming. So GDP doesn't include these non-marketing activities. Sometimes there are some unpaid domestic work. Unpaid domestic work means you are just doing something, but you are not getting paid for that. Suppose I am your friend and I just told you that you are going to Kolkata tomorrow. Just drop one of my letter in Kolkata tomorrow, since you are going to Kolkata tomorrow. But you are not getting paid, because since you are my friend. So this is something like unpaid domestic work. Or there are some informal sector production, or many things. And finally, GDP per capita doesn't include or capture the health, education, or longevity directly. A person's health or a person's education or a person's life expectancy, it is ignored by the GDP per capita. And finally, it ignores the environmental cost of production also. Whenever we increase the GDP, we have to cut down the trees, we have to clear out the forest to make to go from rural to urban, or there is a shift from rural to urban. There is a huge industrialization or rapid urbanization that basically gives us an environmental cost. And basically it doesn't says about some political freedom or personal security or social inclusion. Social inclusion basically means that are you socially included in all of the social welfare schemes? Suppose there is a particular social welfare scheme and I am getting that welfare scheme, but you are not included in that welfare scheme. Though you are eligible for that social scheme, social welfare scheme, but you are not included by anyhow. So it doesn't tell about that how there is a political freedom in this country, or there is a social inclusion in the, I am either included in all of the social sector schemes or welfare schemes, or is there any kind of personal security in me or not. Okay. So these are the things we cover about economic growth and economic development. Now, when I told that there are basically some approaches to make to calculate or to just measure economic development of a country, there are some approach. It is basically divided into two parts. One is the income approach and another is the capability approach. Income approach and capability approach. The first one is income approach. Income approach is the most oldest approach that we use to measure development. Income approach. It basically gives us that what is the growth of income or what is the level of income. Generally, I already talked about per capita income to measure economic development. It basically uses growth or level of income or per capita income to basically measure the economic development. So whenever we are using income approach, we can get that per capita may be a indicator of development. Income, per capita income may be a indicator of development. That what I already told, that suppose a country is having a very large GDP, but it doesn't matter. Whenever a country is having a very large GDP, it doesn't matter that the country is very rich or the each and every of the people in living in that country is very rich. If we just divide the total income divided by the total population, we can get the per capita income, and it may be treated as one kind of indicator for development. Finally, if we calculate about GDP, GNI and per capita income, GDP and GNP we already talked about. GDP is nothing but it is the total value of all the goods and services produced in a country, and it is basically you have to maintain that it is being produced or the service is being provided within the country's national boundary. It should not be beyond the country's national boundary. Okay. And finally, gross national income, GNI. Gross national income basically means what is the total. We have studied about the income method. Income method means if we just add up the wage of labor, there are four factors of production in an economy: land, basically labor, and then after that land, labor, capital, and basically entrepreneur or organization. Okay. So if I just calculate, we get for what we get for land, we basically get rent for land, and for labor we get wage, for capital we get interest rate, and finally for entrepreneur we get profit. So if I just add them up, we can get the total gross national income of the country by the which we call the income method, and we can just say that there is some sort of development or there is no development or the country is underdeveloped, anything. So economic development can be measured by GDP, GNI, per capita income. These are the basically approach from income approach to development. Income approach basically means that income approach is something like whatever we can measure, we can quantify in figures. Whenever we are quantifying something in figures and we are just saying that a country is developed or not developed or underdeveloped or developing, we can just say that this is basically an approach by which we can measure the economic development. Now, there are certain limitations based on the income approach. First, the most important problem is in our country is that income inequality. Income inequality, okay, the most important problem. Because suppose there are n people in a country, n people, and for that we just distribute the country's income like y1 for person 1, y2 for person 2, y3 for person 3, y4 for person 4, dot up to yn. Now, if we just get the data of this particular data of the income of the particular pupil from that particular country, there are n persons in the country, and we just have a distribution or we just have a set that y1 is the income of person 1, y2 is the income of person 2. But the most important problem is that there is a huge inequality. Suppose there is a huge inequality between y1 and y4. It may happen that the person 1 and person 4 is having a huge income gap between them. Suppose person 1 is having a income rupees 100 and person 4 is having a income rupees 1 lakh. So it may happen that there is a very huge difference between these two types of people. So whenever we are getting these types of problem, we cannot use the income approach to measure economic development, because there are many things that most of the important problem is income inequality. And I told, if there are n persons in an economy and if you just write the you just write the income of the particular persons of that country, and after writing them you can just see that there may be a huge inequality from person 1 to person 4 or person 4 to person 8 or person 8 to person 19 or anything, or person 19 to person 25. So it may differ. So income inequality, it basically doesn't capture the income inequality problem, which is very important. Equality or income inequality is a very important dimension for economic development. Okay, fine. Now we have already told the environmental cost. Environmental cost means whenever there is an increase in GDP, rapid industrialization is taking place, and as rapid industrialization is taking place, there should be some environmental cost. And quality of life. What is quality of life? Quality of life is basically something, not only having some good health or not only having some very good education is doesn't gives you quality of life. Quality of life is basically health status plus your educational attainment or something, your literacy, in which up to which class how you are reading, or your total literacy rate of the country or total literacy rate of a particular region. And not only that, then personal security as well as political freedom, and there may be many other things which is basically considered in quality of life. So it cannot just explain that what is the problem in quality of life, or is there any drop in the quality of life of the persons living in the country or anything. So income approach is something like, it is basically a thing where we can just get that the quantitative figures like GDP, GNP, per capita income, but it does not talk about the qualitative ones, which is very important for economic development. Now one of the problem is that purchasing power parity, PPP. Okay, purchasing power parity is basically something like, I have given an example. Suppose a worker in country X earned the local currency equivalent to USD 500 per month. Okay, there is a person who is living in country X and he earns something which is equivalent to USD 500 per month. Okay, at the market exchange rate. If the same basket of good that costs USD 500 in United States costs the local currency equivalent of only USD 250 in country X, then the workers PPP adjusted income is effectively USD 1000. Because suppose I am giving an example. Suppose I am living in America and you are living in some other country, other parts of the world. So you are earning a money. If I convert, suppose you are earning rupees A, you are just earning rupees A. And whenever you are earning rupees A, if you just convert it to USD dollar, it is basically becoming USD 500. Okay. And I am living in America, you are living in India, and I am living in America. Okay. And when I am living in America, I am also earning USD dollar 500. Fine, no issues. Now I want to purchase a basket of goods. I want to purchase a basket of goods. Suppose I want to purchase a basket of goods that may include many things: some chocolates, some chips, some cold drinks, some groceries, some t-shirt, some jeans pant. There are many things which is in our necessary things. If we consider those necessary things, and if we just consider a basket of goods, when I am going to purchase that particular basket of good, I have to spend USD or dollar 500. But whenever in India you are purchasing that particular basket of goods, you have to spend not dollar 500, you have to spend dollar 250. So there is a difference in the purchasing power, and this is basically known as purchasing power parity. Why? Because there is a difference that in my country I have to spend dollar 500 for the same basket of good which you are buying in India, which you are buying in India. And when you are buying in India, if you convert the Indian money to American dollar, then you can check that the same basket of good is costing you rupees 250, dollar 250. But the same basket of good is something like dollar 500 in my country in America. So whenever there is a exchange rate conversion, you can see you have to spend dollar 250 for purchasing something in your country India, and when I have to purchase that particular thing in America, I have to spend rupees 500. The same thing, we are buying the same thing, but I have to spend something, I have to spend rupees 500 per dollar, and you have to spend $250. So whenever you are just writing this, or whenever you are just getting this is basically the purchasing power parity. So whenever there is if we just consider purchasing power parity as a measure for economic development, we can basically say that yes, there are something. If we just consider that there may be something, because we should take into the account of purchasing power parity before we compare between two nations. If I want to compare between America and India for a particular goods and service, so first I have to calculate what is the price it costs in America and what is the price it is costing in India for the same basket of goods and services. So basically this is why we calculate purchasing power parity. Okay, this may be one thing why we use purchasing power parity for our in our limitations also. Okay, now not only the income approach, there is another approach, that is basically the capability approach. Okay, capability approach. Just this capability approach was first given by the economist, or you may say a philosopher, Amartya Sen, in the late 1970s, or and between 1980s onward. So capability approach basically means that this was something like that the real objective of that particular of economic development is not only getting the or accumulating the commodities or goods and service or income, but also there may be some freedom in the country, or there may be freedom in the region, so that the people who are living in that country, they get some reason to value. they get some reason to value. This was firstly given by Amartya Sen, that not only a country with a very high income, not only a country, suppose you are a country whose GDP is very high, whose GDP per capita is very high, but in your country you do not have political freedoms, you do not have any kind of freedoms, you cannot go to the market on openly, you cannot buy something, there are certain restrictions for the women cannot go to the schools, you cannot go to the market after 8 p.m. So there are many types of things which you cannot do in your country, but your country is very rich, your country is having a lot of a very high GDP, your country is having a very high GDP per capita, you are very rich, your country is very rich, all of the persons living in your country are very rich. But what will happen if you do not have the particular freedoms, if that country, and you do not get some reason to value, you do not give some, you get some reason to value, that is you cannot go to certain places, there are some restrictions for women, there are some restrictions for man, there are some restrictions for children, there are some there is always a problem going into the country, there is always a war going into the country, there is political war, inside political war in the country, so you cannot avail many things, many social welfare schemes. So this basically, this was the idea given by Amartya Sen. This is known as capability approach. Capability approach is totally different from the income approach, where in the income approach, what we talk about in the income approach, you always talk about what is the GDP, what is the GNP, what is the purchasing power parity to measure economic development. But capability approach says or not, the objective of a country or the objective of each and every person in the country is not only to accumulate wealth, or not only to accumulate income, or not only to accumulate commodities or goods and service, it is also something that it should be the expansions of freedoms of the people, there should be some expansions of freedom of the people, where we differ from capability and income approach. If you just look upon the income approach, it was basically quantitative, it was basically quantitative. Why quantitative? Because each and everything that was being discussed in income approach can be measured by some figures. We can measure GDP, we can measure purchasing power parity, we can measure GNI, we can measure GDP per capita income, we can measure each and everything. But capability approach is not quantitative, rather we can say that it is basically a qualitative approach. It is basically a qualitative approach, because whenever we do not what Amartya Sen basically told, that what was the approach basically tells us that it is not only our objective to get some income and accumulate it, to get some wealth and accumulate it, there should be some expansions in the freedom. Okay, fine. Now, basic intuition, suppose I have given a basic intuition, income and commodities are only useful because of what they allow a person to do or be. Okay, suppose you are getting some money, but whenever you are getting some money, what you, where the money you will store? Some of the money you will store in your bank, or some of the money you will store in your mutual fund or share market. But the money which is being left with you, what is the main reason you are getting your income, or what is the main reason you are going for a job, or what is the main reason you are going for some income? The main reason is, after getting that income or after going to the job, the income I will generate, I want to do something with that income. Suppose example is given, a bicycle is valuable not for itself, but because it allows a person to move around. Okay, just like that, I am having a income, but I cannot spend that income in my sense, because I do not have the freedom in my country, I do not have the freedom in my country. So whenever you are generating some income from any kind of source, from business or from a job or from anything, so what the first thing you want to do, that after generating that income, after accumulating this income, I would want to get a t-shirt from a particular brand, of a particular brand. I want to buy a new bike, and I want to buy a new car, I want to buy something, a new hotel, or I want to buy a new house, and I want to live there, I want to go with that car, I want to wear this t-shirt, I want to wear this jeans pant. But if you are not allowed to wear this t-shirt, you are not allowed to wear this jeans pant, you are not allowed to go with that particular car, so what is the income then for? So this is what is the capability approach. Okay, now capabilities basically represents here various combinations that is a person is able to achieve. The first one is, it should be real and it should be sustaining freedom to choose between different ways and styles of living. Basically, if you say that if you just distinguish between resource and versus capabilities, resource, there is a very narrow distinction. What resource or commodities means, basically resource or commodities are something if, by which a person is commanding over, and capabilities are those resource which basically translates them, okay, which basically translates them. Because suppose I can say that there may be difference in characteristics of each and every people. Suppose my age and your age is not the same, my health or your health is not the same, but the thing is that the climate factors or the environmental factors or the social arrangements, okay, public provisions or some discriminations, there are some social arrangements. So there is some difference between the capabilities and commodities or sorry, resources and capabilities. Resources basically is something like you can command over basically means that you can just get some coal from the coal mine. This is something what we call resource. You can get some wood from the forest. This is basically what we call as resource. You can get crude oil from the oil mines. This is what we basically call resource. But capabilities are something different. Capabilities are means that which translates them basically means whenever you are having some resource, you should also have the freedom to use that resource. If you do not have the freedom to use that resource, then there is no there is no meaning that I am having the resource, but I cannot use them because my country has some restrictions. So if you can see that there is a coal mine, but you cannot draw coal from there. There is a oil mine, but you cannot draw oil from there, crude oil from there. So oil, coal, these are basically resources. But whenever you are just going and drawing the coals, or you are getting some oil from crude oil from that oil mine, this is what we call as, and after using those coal, after using those crude oil, converting them into petrol, diesel, and buying some new car and using them, this is basically capability. So there is a difference in resource and capability. Resource basically gives you that all of the things around you, it may be environmental, it may be public, or anything, any kind of resource you may get. But whenever you are getting some resource, if you cannot use them due to certain restrictions, you cannot say that there is a capability. So there is a distinction between resource and capabilities. Okay. Now if I say what I told, that a person basically converts commodities into capabilities. First, it is basically the resource or the commodities. The first thing is that resource or commodities. What I told, that you can see a coal mine, you can see a oil mine, you can see a forest, you can see a river, you can see a ocean, each and everything. But when you are converting this resource or commodities, which you can see, into some capabilities, that is some freedom to achieve, what I told in the previous sentence, that you can see all of them but you do not have the freedom to achieve them. There is certain restrictions in the country. Suppose you are living in my country and I told you that you cannot go to the oceans and get some fish from the ocean. So you have the resource, you have the ocean, you have the resource, you can use the ocean for some fishing purpose. But I told you that there is certain restriction, you cannot go to the ocean or sea and get some fishes from the ocean. So this is basically capability. Okay. So resource and commodities is being translated into capabilities if I have the freedom to achieve it. If I have the freedom to achieve it. And then basically comes functioning. And then basically comes functioning. Functioning basically means actual achievements. That is after getting something. So if I give you an example, if you see a oil mine, that is basically a resource. And when you are getting some crude oil from that oil mine, that is basically capability, that is your freedom to achieve. And after that, whenever you are using that crude oil and converting them into petrol and diesel to give to petrol and diesel to run some cars or to run trains or to run some other types of vehicles, a bike or a car or a scooter or a train, anything, that is basically functioning. Suppose you have seen a coal mine. So this is basically resource. Whenever you are getting some coal from that coal mine, that is your capability, that is your freedom to achieve the coal from the coal mine. And then if you are using that coals for some cooking purpose, or you are using the coals for some vehicle purpose or any kind of thing for some energy generation, you can say that is my functioning. So this is the sequence. First we have the resource or commodities, then we go to capabilities, that is we have the freedom to achieve the resource or commodities, then we go to functioning, that is our actual achievements. Okay, now basically this is our capability approach. And in our capability approach, basically why capability approach is a major departure from income based approach. The most important thing is that it basically evaluate, or it is very qualitative in nature, which basically talks about the freedoms and capabilities of a person. Okay, and it basically treats each and every individual as agents. And the most important, it basically gives you a choice of freedom, because suppose not only coal, or not only petrol, or not only something like forest, you do not need the forest all the time. You should have a choice that I need the coal for this time, so I will get some coal from the coal mine. I need some woods from the forest, so I will get some wood from the forest. Anyone other who is needing some, who needs some oil from the oil mine, he or she is getting some oil from the oil mine. So it gives you a choice of freedom. Okay, so this is basically the capability approach. So there is a distinction between income approach and capability approach. The first thing is that income approach basically goes for the growth of income, and capability approach, it goes for the freedoms and capabilities of a person. Then it goes, the main indicator is per capita income, that is what is, if we divide the total GDP by the total population, and it is basically done by HDI. Okay, and then view of poverty, you can just read it out, it is not so important, just read it out by yourself, because we are going to go for some HDI. Now coming to HDI, now the first thing is that what is the history of HDI. Okay, there is a huge concept of HDI. I will take HDI on tomorrow, on the next day's class, that what is the evolution of HDI. I do not know here I have given the evolution of HDI or not. No, I have not given the evolution of HDI, but there is a very big evolution of HDI from the 90s to the 2000s. Okay, so first, human development basically, as per the UNDP, okay, United Nations Development Program, UNDP, it basically defines human development as a process of enlarging pupils' choice. Pupils' choice means, enlarging pupils' choice means, if I see that I have only two choices, that I can use a computer or I can use a laptop. So there are only two choices. Suppose my choice is being enlarged into three parts again: a computer, a laptop, or a tab. Suppose for some days I have given four options: a computer, a laptop, a tab, or a smartphone. So as we are going to enlarge the pupil's choices, pupil's choice may be very, we already tell in economics that human wants are unlimited. So we can, as we enlarge pupil choices, so the most important thing, as we enlarge pupils' choices, this is basically the concept of human development. Okay, and the most important thing is that a long and healthy life, a long and healthy life, and to acquire knowledge. Acquire knowledge means some education or some literacy into the country. Now, why HDI? What is the backstory of HDI? Previously, there was no HDI. Previously, the first thing what UNDP constructed an index. The Human Development Index was basically introduced by the UNDP. But the first thing which came into the market was, it was PQLI. PQLI. Before HDI came, PQLI, Physical Quality of Life Index, and it was given by a Pakistani economist. The economist's name is also there, Mahabubul Haq. Okay, PQLI. And after PQLI come into the market, and after PQLI goes into the economic frame, there were certain restrictions of PQLI, Physical Quality of Life Index. So after PQLI, PQLI was developed, then again under the leadership of Mehbubul Haq and with Amartya Sen, it is being integrated, or a new index came, that is named as HDI, or the Human Development Index. Okay. Now, the most important purpose or the main dimensions of HDI, where we work basically, the main dimensions is first the health, and how we can measure health, the life expectancy at birth. Suppose I am just born right now, and if I just calculate from today how many days I am going to survive. So this is basically life expectancy at birth. Whenever anyone is getting birth at this particular time, so if I calculate what is the life expectancy of that particular person who just born right now, so we just calculate the health. Okay. Then education, how can we calculate education? It is basically the expected years of schooling, mean and the expected years of schooling. Expected years of schooling means, suppose I can study up to graduation, I will study up to post graduation, or I will study up to class 12, or I should complete my PhD. So this is my expected years of schooling. Expected years means how much, for how much time I can get, I will just study and I will just learn something, I will acquire knowledge. So this is basically education. And the final one is standard of living. Okay, standard of living basically means that, suppose what is the income I am generating and what is the income I am getting. After that income I can get my standard of living. So what should be my standard of living? Standard of living may be, suppose if you get the GNI per capita. GNI per capita means GDP per capita. If you say GDP per capita, that is the per capita income of the person, of each and every persons in the country. So these are the main three dimensions of HDI. First one is health, and how health is being calculated. It is calculated by the life expectancy at birth. Anyone getting birth at this particular time, what is his or her life expectancy from this time? Okay, life expectancy at birth, for how many years he or she is going to live. Then then education. Education, for education we get the expected years of schooling. Expected years of schooling means, suppose from this time for how many years I am going to complete my studies. And then finally the standard of living, that is if you consider purchasing power parity, or the most important thing which is being considered, that is the per capita income. GNI per capita basically means, or GDP per capita. The GDP or GNI per capita is the per capita income. If I get the per capita income, then I can get the standard of living. Now if I take the geometric mean, suppose I consider health and then education and then standard of living. Okay, if I take the geometric mean of this particular thing, if I take the geometric mean of this particular thing, then what I will get, if I take the geometric mean, then I will get the total HDI, or the human development index. Okay, so the knowledge, a long or healthy life, I already told, life expectancy of birth means the number of years a newborn infant would live if the prevailing patterns of mortality at its time of birth were to stay the same throughout its life. Means, suppose a newborn infant who just got birth, and after that birth, if some test is being done with him or her, and if the patterns are same, or the mortality patterns are same, then what is the years he or she is going to live for. Okay, then knowledge, mean years of schooling means the average number of years of education received by the pupil aged 25 and above. Suppose my age is 25 right now, and what is the average number of years of education I got from school or college or universities, that is to be taken. Okay, and expected years of schooling. Expected years of schooling basically means the number of years of schooling a child of school entrance age can expect to receive given current enrollment patterns. Suppose there is an enrollment pattern for the last 5 years, 20 students, 30 students, 50 students. So what is the expected years of schooling? A child who is just getting the school right now, what can be his or her expected years of schooling, for how many days he is going to cover up his studies and all that. Okay, and finally, the decent standard of living. It can be explained by the GNI per capita. GNI per capita means if we divide the total income by the total population, we get the GNI per capita. Now, these dimensions, if I get these dimensions, and after getting these dimensions, if we take the geometric mean, okay, if we take the geometric mean, what we can get? We can basically get the HDI. Now, there is a process of constructing HDI. This is very important. Cost process of HDI is, suppose we have to, this is a minimum thing or maximum thing. We have to go for two things. What is the life expectancy at birth? What is the minimum life expectancy after a newborn infant came into the world? What is the minimum life expectancy he or she can get? I assume that, suppose it is 20 years. Okay, not I am assuming, this is basically the rule. 20 years is the minimum goalpost, and the maximum he or she can live for 85 years. Okay, what should be the mean years of schooling? that a person who is aged 25 right now, for what is the average, that what is the average years of schooling for him or her? It is basically the minimum is 0 years and basically maximum is 15 years. And then expected years of schooling, it may be 0 years and maximum is 18 years. And GNI per capita, if I consider the purchasing power parity US dollar, then per capita GNI per capita is $100 and it may be $75,000. Okay. Now, whenever we get this data, we cannot just suppose I tell you that whenever you have a column, and for this particular 4 columns, whenever you get this data, you cannot just take the geometric mean of all these data. Step 2, there is a step 2. This is basically normalization or dimension indices. Normalization basically means your actual value minus minimum value divided by maximum value minus minimum value. Okay. So suppose a person is having a life expectancy of, suppose let me say 45 years. So what will be the formula? Actual value minus minimum value. 45 is the actual value minus minimum value. What is the minimum value? 20 years divided by maximum value. What is the maximum value? 85 minus what is the minimum value? It is again 20. So whenever we are having any kind of data of life expectancy, we are just normalizing them, and the process of normalization is actual value minus minimum value divided by maximum value minus minimum value, and we will get something. So this will be our life expectancy at birth. Okay. So if a person is having a life expectancy of 45 years. Now coming to the educational index, for the mean years of schooling, it is being divided with 15. Suppose the mean years of schooling is suppose 12. So if I just divide it with 15, I will get the mean years of schooling. This is our mean years of schooling. Fine. And for the expected years of schooling, it is being divided by 18. Suppose my expected years of schooling is 15. So I will just divide it by 18 and I will get the expected years of schooling. Fine. And then these two are educational indices. These two are basically educational indices. So what I will do, after dividing mean years of schooling with 15, I will get a figure, suppose A, and after dividing expected years of schooling by 18, I will get a figure, suppose B. Then I will make a combined education index and it will be A plus B by 2. It will be A plus B by 2. Okay. So in case of years of schooling, for the educational indices, I do not have to go for actual value minus minimum value divided by maximum value minus minimum value. For life expectancy, I have to, if any kind of life expectancy data comes to me, I already told about 45. So 45 minus 20 divided by 85 minus 20. But for case of years of schooling, mean years of schooling and expected years of schooling, what I will do, I will just divide them with 15 or I will just divide them with 18. And after dividing them, I will get some data. And for that data, I will make a combined education index, and that is the two, I get A plus B divided by 2. A is the mean years of schooling after dividing by 15 and B is the expected years of schooling after dividing by 18. Okay. And now finally the income index. Now again for the income index, I will go for the actual value minus minimum value by maximum value minus minimum value. What is the minimum income? 100, and what is the maximum? 75,000. But whenever we consider income, what we do, we basically take a log. Why log? Because suppose GNI per capita may be very large. Suppose the GNI per capita is 10,000. Suppose it is 10,000. So when you are considering 10,000, see if it is very large, so what we do, we take a log. Whenever we are taking a log, it basically becomes very small. So it becomes easy to calculate. Nothing else, it becomes easy to calculate. So again, suppose someone is having a GDP per capita income of, let me say, 30,000. Okay, 30,000. So again, I will go to the formula, log of 30,000 minus actual value minus minimum value. What was the minimum value? It is 100. Then log of 100 divided by maximum value minus minimum value. What is the maximum value? 75,000. Then log of 75,000 minus log of what is the minimum value? Log of 100. So I will just calculate it and I will get something, I will get some figure. Okay. After getting these three figures, so in both two cases, remember whenever you are constructing a HDI, whenever you are constructing a HDI, you have the data for, suppose there will be three columns. One column is life expectancy, one column will be mean years of schooling, one column will be expected years of schooling, and one column will be GNI per capita. There are four columns. And I told you to calculate GDP. I told you to calculate HDI. What you will do for this life expectancy and GNI column, you will use this dimension index, but for these two you will just divide them by 18, and what you will do, you will divide them by 2 and get a figure. And after getting this all the figures, the HDI is basically calculated by the life expectancy, what the figure I got, into some expectancy of the basically educational index, combined educational index, and finally the income index, and we take the geometric mean of this. And after taking the geometric mean of this, we get some data, suppose 3.2 or 4.5, anything, we get the data and we just interpret HDI. Now how to interpret HDI? Okay, I have given a numerical example. I will give you an Excel file. You all have to do that. How can you construct a HDI? I have given a numerical example here also. Okay. The actual value is a 68 years, mean years of schooling 17 years, expected years of schooling 12 years, GNI per capita is 6,000, and how you do calculate HDI. So the HDI becomes suppose 0.637. So interpretation of HDI basically means whenever the HDI is greater than 0.8 and above, so it is very high human development. When it is ranging from 0.7 to 0.799, it is high development. And when it is ranging from 0.55 to 0.699, it is medium human development. And whenever it is below 0.55, it is low human development. Okay, so this is basically the interpretation of HDI, and this is a real life example. It is being, suppose I will give you an Excel file and you can have the data of this 68 years, 7 years, 12 years, and then 6,000. This is the data, and I told you to calculate the HDI of this. What you will do for this 68 years, minimum actual value minus minimum value, that is 20, by maximum value minus minimum value 85 minus 20, you get 0.739. Then dividing 7 with 12, because mean years of schooling is divided by 12, you are getting 0.467, and dividing 12 with 18 expected years of schooling, you are getting 0.667. Then 0.467 plus 0.667 divided by 2, you get some 0.567. After that, the income index, that is 6,000. Again for that, log of 6,000 minus log of 100 divided by log of maximum, log of 75,000 minus log of 100, you get 0.619. Then you just calculate 0. This, 0. This, and 0. This to the power 1 by 3, or you can just write 0.739 into 0.567 and into 0.619. This is basically the geometric index, and after taking the geometric mean, you shall get the HDI. And how to interpret the HDI? Whenever you can see the HDI of a country, whenever it is greater than 0.8 and above, you can tell that it is a very high human development. Whenever it is 0.7 and 0.79, it is high human development, and whenever from 0.55 to 0.699, medium human development, and below 0.55, it is very low human development. Okay, it is, the descriptions are also given. So in tomorrow, in next class, what I will do, I will generate an Excel file. Okay, I will just show you that how you can interpret HDI, how you can just calculate HDI. And after tomorrow's class, after I show you in Excel that how you can calculate HDI, I will give you the data for two countries. Okay, country 1 and country 2. I will give you an Excel file with two countries, and after that I will tell you to construct the HDI. And after constructing the HDI, or not only two countries, I shall give you the data for 50 countries, and I will tell you to construct a HDI index for all the 50 countries, and you just check that whether the countries fall in which category, either very high development or high development, medium development or low development. This is basically what you have in today's class.